If you've been building up your camera bag and think it's time to upgrade to a premium, expensive, high-end prime lens, then make sure you watch this video first.
Welcome back to the Camera Bag Essentials video series. By the end of this video, you'll know whether or not you and your photography business are ready to upgrade your prime lens or if there's a better way to invest your hard-earned cash. But before we jump into that, we want to introduce ourselves.
I'm Hunter.
And I'm Sarah.
And we're Hunter and Sarah Photography, a husband and wife wedding photography team.
We're also educators, and our goal is to help photographers build strong foundations in both their businesses and their personal lives so that they can run profitable and sustainable photography businesses.
So last week we covered a pretty similar topic to what we're covering this week, which was when it's time to upgrade your camera body.
But this week we're going to be talking about whether it's time to upgrade your prime lens, which, if you're like most portrait and wedding photographers, is actually your workhorse lens and captures most of your images.
So if you watched Camera Bag Essentials Part 1, we discussed the 35mm versus 50mm versus 85mm. And in that discussion, you may have noticed that we were comparing pretty much exclusively f1.8 lenses. And they ranged from a couple $100 to maybe around $500. And we still believe that one of those lenses, especially a 50 or an 85 1.8, are probably one of the best purchases that a new photographer can make in order to really up their portrait game.
However, if you've been shooting for some time now, you might have noticed that when it comes to prime lenses, and especially those three popular focal lengths, camera makers have several different versions. So for example, Nikon makes 10 different versions of a 50mm lens, ranging from $135 to over $2,000. So what's the difference between them all?
So let's start, if you remove all the older, manual focus lenses that were like made back in the 80s, what it really comes down to is DSLR versus mirrorless, which we will get into a little bit more at the end of this video, and the minimum aperture. So we know it can be a bit confusing to look at all of these options, so we're gonna really narrow it down into just why someone might consider upgrading their prime lens in the first place.
So for starters, there are three things that are generally true as you move from an f1.8 lens to a 1.4 lens to a 1.2 lens, aside from the fact that the minimum aperture number is lower.
So the first thing, and you can especially see that with the 50mm lenses, is that they are going to get bigger and heavier.
Yeah. Second, the lens is going to get more expensive.
And third, the lens is just overall going to be a higher quality piece of equipment that produces sharper and just nicer images with a shallower depth of field.
Yeah, so let's take the 50mm lenses for example. If you took a photo of the exact same subject on the exact same day in the exact same lighting conditions with a 51.8, a 51.4, and a 51.2, all set at an f-stop of 200 of f2.0, the images taken with the more expensive, lower f-stop lenses would be sharper and of higher quality than the cheaper ones.
So another way to say that is that this $2,000 prime lens is just generally going to take nicer images than one taken with this $500 prime lens, and way nicer images than a $135 f1.8 50mm. And even if you were shooting all of them at the same aperture, right? So that's true not just when you're shooting, the f1.2 lens at f1.2, but at every aperture, pretty much across the board, it's going to be just a little bit nicer, sharper, higher quality image.
Yeah, it's pretty difficult to really appreciate how much nicer the more expensive lenses are until you just go out and shoot with them. So if you are considering upgrading your prime lens, we'd recommend borrowing or even renting one and just trying it out first.
However, just because Nikon or Canon makes a nicer version of your current favorite prime lens, that doesn't necessarily mean that it makes sense for you and your business to go ahead and spend that hundreds or thousands of dollars to upgrade.
So how do you know when it's time to upgrade your prime lens? Our answer is actually going to be different depending on what you shoot and what your current camera bag looks like right now.
So if you've been watching this series all the way from the beginning, you know that in addition to a starter prime lens like a 50 or an 85 f1.8, that we also recommend that wedding photographers for the most part also have access to some sort of wide angle zoom lens and a telephoto zoom lens, preferably one of the more professional f2.8 lenses.
Yeah, we also recommend that anyone who wants to be a professional wedding photographer also has a macro lens for detail photos, as well as a flash in their bag.
So if you're preparing for your first or second wedding season and you don't have any of those lenses or a flash, or if you're still shooting on a kind of entry-level crop sensor camera, then we'd recommend filling your kit out in some of those other ways before you upgrade your prime lens. And by the way, we have a video for all of those different types of lenses, flashes, everything. So if you do want to know more about that, then feel free to go check out some of our other videos.
Now, as much as we love shooting with our prime lenses, wedding days can be unpredictable unpredictable. So before you spend your entire lens budget on updating to a nicer, more expensive prime lens, it would actually be better for you to invest in another lens that would help you be more prepared for any situation on a wedding day and just capture every aspect of that wedding day.
Yeah, as much as we love shooting with prime, I love my 85, but if I walk into a tight getting ready suite, the most expensive 85mm in the world is not going to do me any good. Likewise, in a massive church cathedral type environment, the nicest 50mm in the world is not going to cut it. You just sometimes need more focal length options. But on the other hand, if you've already purchased a lot of those lenses, if you've got a flash as well as a backup, if you've got a great full frame sensor body as well as maybe a backup camera, then upgrading your prime lens can be a really great way to elevate your imagery to the next level.
However, if you don't shoot weddings or other events and situations that would require a zoom lens or a macro lens or a flash, then there's no need to pay for all of these things.
So we're talking right now, especially to people who are exclusively portrait photographers. If you only use 1 or 2 prime lenses and that's really it, and you don't find yourself wishing you had zoom lenses or any of those other things, then you don't need to buy them. Just upgrade your prime lens as soon as you can and really elevate your portrait work.
Yeah. However, the caveat that we like to add to every conversation about upgrading your camera bag is that we don't believe going into debt is the answer. We would rather you shoot a handful of additional portrait sessions or a couple of weddings with your current lenses and save up to purchase nicer equipment in cash.
So we just want to share a bit of our experience when it comes to prime lenses especially. So before Sarah and I ever shot our first wedding, we began our portrait photography career shooting with an 85mm f1.8 and Sarah with her 50mm f1.4.
Both of these lenses were around $500 and they helped us book and shoot enough jobs that we were able to purchase our first, f2.8 zoom lens, a handful of other flashes, a macro lens, and upgrade our cameras to full frame.
However, as soon as we felt like our camera bag had everything we needed for a successful wedding day, we were so excited to upgrade our prime lenses. So for me, I went from the 85-1.8 to the 85-1.4 DSLR lens, which this is about a $1,700 lens compared to this, $450 or so.
Yeah, then when we upgraded to the Nikon mirrorless ecosystem, we actually spurged $2,100 on the 50mm 1.2 lens for me. And on portrait sessions, we shoot probably 90% of the session on these 2 lenses. And on wedding days, we probably shoot about 75% on these lenses as well, not including dancing photos.
So in our view, because we use them so much, no matter how much we spent on that upgrade, it was always going to be a good return on our investment because we do just shoot so much of what we deliver to our clients on these lenses. And by the way, Nikon has an 85mm mirrorless lens coming out, either 1.4 or 1.2, and you better believe that I will be the very first person on the wait list ready to upgrade from this guy to the one nicer iteration.
Yeah. And that actually ties into our final piece of advice on this topic. So just like most technology, the science of optics and lens making advances over time. Not as fast as maybe iPhones or camera bodies, but still, all else equal, a newer lens of a similar type will actually be nicer than an older one. So a 50mm 1.4 lens that Nikon made in the 80s is not going to be as nice as the one that they released last year.
And since Nikon, Sony, and Canon have all made it pretty clear that mirrorless is the future, it looks like most or even all of the new lenses that these big 3 camera manufacturers come out with from here on out are going to be mirrorless lenses.
So if you want to take advantage of the new advancement in lens technology, upgrading to the mirrorless ecosystem is definitely the way to go.
But we talked all about that in the very first part 0 video on this series. And if you just can't afford to go mirrorless just yet, they still make some incredible low aperture DSLR lenses, which by the way, will still work with mirrorless cameras, but again, more on that in the first video. But one thing we've actually heard from other photographers, and we don't know this specifically, or rather we don't know this firsthand, but that the mirrorless version of some of their old DSLR lenses are actually much nicer. So the 85-1.8 mirrorless is about $300 more than the 85-1.8 it's about $500 more than the 1.8 in the DSLR version, but we've heard it's much nicer, almost as nice as the 1.4 lens, even though technically they're the same.
But that's it.
That's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching this video. We really hope that this has helped you understand how to best spend your hard-earned photography dollars in order to grow your business.
If you want more helpful free content for photographers, as well as a community of people who are also building their photography businesses, we'd encourage you to join our Facebook community, Mastering the Wedding Photography Biz with Hunter and Sarah.
Speaking of Mastering the Wedding Photography Biz with Hunter and Sarah, our Facebook group, we are actually going to post a poll this weekend about what our next video series should be on, because we only have one more week left after this in the Camera Bag Essentials series. So if you want to say in what we produce and what sort of content we're making, then go join that community and vote in that poll.
Yeah. If you are ready to upgrade your prime lens, we'd be honored if you would consider using our affiliate link in the description below. You pay the same price that you normally would on Amazon. We just get a small cut as a thank you for making this video.
And finally, if you want an even deeper dive in any of this content about premium prime lenses, then we'd encourage you to check out the more detailed written version of this video on the Hunter and Sarah Photography blog. The link to all of these things is below in the description.
But thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.